Some prisons have no bars. They are built with reinforced glass, Italian imported marble floors, and Swarovski chandeliers dangling from double-height ceilings. But the chill inside them can still freeze your soul, especially when your heart is wrapped like a piece of decor, beautiful, silent, and useless. Eloise Chapman once believed love would save her until it was priced in legacy and reproductive expectation. From the largest room in the glass mansion nestled in Buckhead, the wealthiest neighborhood in North Atlanta, Dr. Priced of 2 Fortvus, Eloise Chapman stood still before a floor-to-ceiling window, her gaze stretching beyond the manicured velvet-like lawn to the misty skyline of downtown. Clad in an amber silk dress, her honey-blonde hair loosely tied back, she resembled a living portrait painted only to be admired. But her eyes, once ablaze when she lectured on Shakespeare at Emory, now reflected only the quiet resignation of someone devoured by silence. 11 chimes rang from the ebony grandfather clock in the foyer, the only sound echoing through the nearly 10,000-square-foot mansion that now felt like a mausoleum. Where once there had been hundreds of receptions, wine glasses, piano tunes, and rehearsed laughter, now remained only the tick of a clock and the breath of a woman asking herself, "How far have I come to get here, and what did I lose along the way?" 3 years ago, she was a young professor, brimming with ambition and immersed in literature. Beau Whitmore, founder of the Whitmore entertainment empire, met her at a university arts fundraiser. He entered like a deity of the industrial stage, 35 years old, wealthy, powerful, his icy blue eyes enough to make older businesswomen tremble. But Eloise, then just 23, saw that his gaze wasn't on her, but on what she could represent, an intellectual image, a womb. "My wife, the literature PhD, teaches at Emory," Beau would announce at events, as if she were a rare trading card he had accidentally acquired. His hand on her waist wasn't affection, it was a declaration of ownership, like a Patek Philippe watch, or the newest McLaren. At first, love had the sweetness of grand gestures, private jet tickets to Paris, galas at Lincoln Center, candlelit dinners overlooking Hilton Head's coastline. But after the wedding, the light went out. Belpine Estate, the dream of many, became a gilded cage. The only key to affection, to being heard, to existing, was to bear him an heir. Beau didn't hide it. "The Whitmore bloodline doesn't end with me," he declared. "We'll do this right: ovulation, tracking, hormone treatments, preparation, no emotions." Each month became a laboratory. Intimacy was scheduled like shareholder meetings. And she, once a woman of thought and flesh, was reduced to productive capacity. Eloise still taught 3 days a week at Emory. "A token of academic charity," Beau would remark. "It'll look great in the press." He allowed it not out of trust, but because he knew the PR value it added to his brand as a billionaire with depth. That morning, he walked in Italian leather shoes, tapping on marble, the scent of Tom Ford lingering before his image appeared in the glass. Beau, tall, chiseled, piercing blue eyes, a bespoke suit. No one could deny this man's allure until he opened his mouth. "The car will be here in 20, he said, adjusting his white gold cufflinks. "Tonight's the Southeast Music Association gala, you know your role." She nodded. "Smile at the right time. Don't speak unless asked. And never offer an opinion," she murmured, a near ritual. But behind that compliance, a wild bird was thrashing inside her chest. She thought of the adult literacy program at Old Fourth Ward, where she secretly volunteered each week under the pretense of going to a spa, where grown adults quietly learned to read, where their eyes lit up with understanding. It was the only place she still felt real. "I was thinking," she hesitated, "about helping expand the life skills program there." "No," he cut her off, eyes never meeting hers. "Focus on what matters. Do you even know how much the last IVF cycle cost? Every hour you spend there wastes our investment in the future." The words landed like a slap. Beau didn't see a person. He saw return, failure, potential, waste. She used to wonder, had her husband been born without love? Later, she'd learn he grew up in a trailer park in southern Georgia, his mother a janitor, his father lost to alcohol. He rose by sheer will, and to survive, he'd learned to see emotions as burdens, kindness as weakness. "The Kellermans will be at the gala tonight," he added. I need you to be pleasant to Mrs. Kellerman. She controls over 70% of her husband's investment decisions. She nodded again, eyes drifting to the old lace handkerchief on the wooden shelf. It had belonged to her grandmother, Dorothy Hill, who had taught her to read in a shabby apartment behind a diner. Kindness is a form of strength, child, her grandmother once whispered. Don't let anyone convince you it's a weakness. Every time she wanted to give up, she remembered her. She remembered her journey to the university lectern, to her students, to poetry, and wondered how much of herself she had lost just to become a decorative line on the genealogical map of a calculating man. And then, that evening, adjusting the aquamarine gown in front of the mirror, she placed her hand on her belly. It was flat, but deep inside, something was growing, not just life, but a prayer. If a child were the price for love, she would offer it. But if that child were a girl, then what? Tomorrow's ultrasound appointment card still sat in her jewelry box like a flame flicker in a storm. She didn't know just 6 weeks later she would be standing in the rain, pregnant, homeless, penniless, nameless. She didn't know the world she built with a man would collapse in a single sentence. You and that mistake get out of my house. But tonight, she would still attend the gala and smile as if nothing inside her had shattered. The ultrasound room on the 8th floor of Northside Medical Center in North Atlanta was bathed in white light and the distinct scent of antiseptic. A hazy image of a tiny growing being appeared on the screen. Tiny fingers, a steady heartbeat, and the soft curve of an unformed nose. But right at the center of that image was the point that made the doctor beam. A healthy, 4-week-old baby girl, stretching her arms as if waving to the world. Dr. Melanie Hart, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind half-rimmed glasses, turned and said, "Congratulations, Dr. Chapman. It's an entirely healthy girl with an excellent heartbeat, perfect measurements, and full of energy. This little one will be a warrior." Eloise smiled through tears. Her heart expanded into 1,000 fragments of light filled with joy, pride, and gratitude. A daughter, she thought of the nights Grandma Hill whispered poetry to her, the times she helped her spell through classic novels, the gentle hand-holding through childhood nightmares. A little girl to carry on the legacy of strong, quiet women. But beside her, Beau Whitmore hadn't said a word. Not a silence of emotion, but a deadly kind of stillness. He stared at the screen like it was a verdict, brows furrowed, jaw clenched. His left hand gripped so tightly the knuckles turned white. "Doctor," he said, flat like metal slicing air, "are you sure? Could it be wrong?" Melania flinched slightly. "I'm very sure, Mr. Whitmore. At 14 weeks, accuracy is extremely high with this equipment. You can see the genital structure. This is a healthy baby girl." Beau said nothing. He stood up, tugged at his shirt collar like it was choking him, then turned to the window. His reflection pressed against the soundproof glass, black and dense like a spreading ink stain. Eloise touched her belly, feeling the pulse beneath her skin. As if to the child, she whispered, "You are perfect, my love. Mommy loves you." Beau turned around. His eyes no longer belonged to the man who took her to Paris for the first time. They were the eyes of a strategist who just spotted a failure. 3 years, he said slowly, like reading an indictment. 3 years of therapy, doctors, tests, meds. 3 years straight. And this is the result. A girl? Eloise froze. "Beau, this is our child. Part of you, part of me. She's life." "No," he cut in coldly. "She's a biological error. Nature's joke, an investment failure." He turned to the doctor, voice smooth again. "Thank you for your services, Dr. Hart. We want some privacy now." Momentarily stunned, Melanie nodded, gathered the files, and left, leaving behind a thick silence like a courtroom. The door clicked shut behind her with a soft sound Eloise would never forget. Beau stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the light. "You know what this means, don't you?" he asked, his voice low, as if appraising a deal. Eloise clutched the tissue draped over her belly. "It means we're having a baby. A child who needs love." "No," he spat. "It means everything I built dies with me. A girl doesn't carry my name to the next generation, doesn't continue the legacy, doesn't inherit. She's nothing, just a debt." She struggled to sit up, face pale. "She's our blood, Beau. not a figure on your legacy spreadsheet. You don't get it, her growled. I climbed from nothing. I did what no one dared to do, build an empire. This child is a flaw, a curse. She's a structural defect I cannot let exist. The drive home felt like a funeral procession. Neither spoke a word, except for the hum of the A divided by C, the wipers, and an FM radio reporting a cold front moving down from the north. Atlanta braced for the first chill of winter, but the cold in the car was worse. Eloise stared outside. Through the glass, she saw fathers walking with children, mothers laughing in parks, ordinary people with something she couldn't touch in her supposedly perfect world, a real family. When the car stopped in front of Belpine Estate, it had begun to rain. They entered the marble-floored hall as usual. No words, no expressions. But halfway through the foyer, Beau stopped, removed his coat, unstrapped his watch, and spoke with the tone of a CEO terminating a contract. Pack your things. Leave my house. You and that mistake have no place in my life anymore. Eloise froze mid-stare, her trembling hand clinging to the mahogany railing. You, what? I said leave. Tonight. Before I call security. You're joking. This is our home. Our marriage. Your child. This is a failed project, he snarled. You're just like my ex-wife, only you took 3 years to deliver a useless result. No son. No legacy. Girls aren't useless, she cried. She's a miracle. She loves. Love? He scoffed. Love doesn't exist at our level. Here, there's only strategy, legacy, calculations. And then, like crushing any remaining illusion, he walked into the room, opened the closet, pulled out her Louis Vuitton suitcase, and threw in her clothes and heels with no care. Silk, lace, cashmere, scattered across the stairs like remnants of a rejected life. The suitcase tumbled down, thudding against the front door, sliding across the cold stone floor. Eloise had no tears left. She stood there, a 4 months pregnant woman, expelled from the life she had given up everything to enter. She touched her belly, where the child remained silent. Beau stepped forward. His eyes weren't angry anymore, they were empty. I won't claim the girl, and don't use the Whitmore name. Leave my house and never come back, she whispered. I have nowhere to go. He shrugged. Should have thought of that before betraying my legacy with a useless child. The door swung open. Wind rushed in. She turned again and saw the man who once vowed to love her, standing atop the staircase like a fallen god, proud, cold, and alone in his pride. She'll love you, she whispered, if you let her in. I've closed that door, he said, and lost the key. Eloise Chapman, one hand on her suitcase, the other guarding her belly, stepped into the December rain of Georgia, not knowing where to go, not knowing how to start over, but knowing one thing: she would never let her daughter believe she was a mistake. The cold rain stabbed like needles, the wind whipped across her cheeks, and the Atlanta night sky seemed to rage down on every rooftop, sidewalk, and the exhausted body of Eloise Chapman. She dragged herself along Peachtree Street, shoes soaked, her evening gown stained with mud, mascara smeared like shredded memories. In her hand, the once pricey suitcase, once a symbol of status, now screeched against the slick pavement like a cruel punchline from fate. She no longer knew where she was going, only that there was no going back. The bus stop on Fifth Avenue was deserted. No buses had passed since the city issued a snowstorm alert. The towering buildings stood like silent witnesses to her collapse. A pregnant woman, cast aside, curling into a shadow behind a torn billboard. She curled up, arms wrapped around her belly, the wind piercing from all directions. She thought of her mother, gone from ovarian cancer when she was in 11th grade. Of Mrs. Hill, who taught her to read from torn newspapers in a cramped apartment. And now, she, college lecturer, wife of a billionaire, sat on the curb like someone the world had forgotten. I'm sorry, she whispered to her belly. Mommy couldn't protect you. Then, a pair of headlights appeared. A grey Honda Accord pulled up beside the stop. The door opened. A man in a raincoat stepped out, holding an umbrella, his face a mix of concern and surprise. Ma'am? His voice was low, gentle, but carried strength. You can't stay here. This weather's dangerous. She looked up. the streetlight highlighting her pale face and swollen eyes. She shook her head weakly. "I'm fine. I'm waiting for the last bus." "Bus service ended 2 hours ago," the man said evenly, but without pressure. "You're pregnant. How far along?" 4.5 months, she murmured. I got kicked out." He didn't ask more, just stood silently, stepped closer, removed his outer coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The thick fabric still held the scent of Earl Grey tea and soft laundry detergent. "I'm Caleb Monroe," he said, "branch manager at Georgia Trust Bank in Midtown, and I volunteer at the Adult Literacy Center nearby." She looked up, eyes questioning. "I'm not a trafficker," he smiled faintly. "I just can't leave you here to freeze." She still hesitated, but when another shiver ran up her spine, she nodded faintly. Eloise. "Come on, Eloise. My house isn't big, but warm and has hot soup. I don't have much else, but tonight maybe that's enough." Caleb's house sat in the Green Hills neighborhood, quiet, not far from downtown, with a gray tiled roof and an oak porch swept clean of snow. The house looked like something from a fairy tale, no grandeur, no high-tech gadgets, but full of that feeling of belonging. Inside, the scent of firewood from the fireplace blended with hand-cooked tomato soup, tangy, creamy, and fragrant like a memory. Eloise shivered as she removed her worn-down heels. Caleb handed her a thick cream bathrobe and hand-knit wool socks. "My wife Emma used these," he said softly. "She passed 2 years ago, but she's still here, in the things I keep." Photos around the house showed a gentle brunette smiling with a dog, planting lavender, curled up with books by a window, a tender soul still lingering in every curtain, embroidered pillow, and globe-shaped reading lamp. Eloise sat at the dining table. In front of her, a steaming bowl of tomato soup and garlic, buttered bread. Her hands trembled, but she ate slowly like someone who had just remembered she was allowed to live. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You don't know anything about me." Caleb shrugged. "Emma used to say, when God sends someone needing help, it's often because he's sending someone who needs saving, too. I used to think I was saving people. Now, maybe it's them saving me from going cold after losing her." Eloise lowered her head. Tears fell into her soup, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were a kind of release. He prepared the guest room for her, the sheets still scented with lavender, a small bookshelf filled with classics, and a framed photo of Emma beside a hand-stitched quote on the wall, "Kindness is the last luxury of the brave." She stood before the mirror-hollowed face, messy hair, dark circles, but amid all that, the child within her stirred, reminding her that this life wasn't over. That night, she slept well for the first time in years, unjudged, uncounted, unpriced by her womb. Through the thin wall, she heard Caleb's soft prayer, "Emma, if you can listen to me, let her stay. She needs a place to believe in others. And I need a reason to believe in the world again." And in a quiet corner of Green Hills, where there was no silk, no status, no power, just a golden light, a bit of warmth, and a bowl of tomato soup, a chosen family was beginning to form. Time did not hurry in Green Hills. Each morning, Eloise woke up to sunlight filtering through pale yellow silk curtains, the aroma of hand-brewed coffee filling the little kitchen, and the sound of Caleb reading the paper while Milo, the rescued Labrador, curled around her feet as if she'd always lived there. Caleb never asked about Beau, the collapsed marriage, or the secrets she held. He only asked, "Pancakes or omelette this morning?" Eloise once believed silence was a wound, but now she understood silence could also be a bandage wrapped in unassuming kindness. Each evening, they dined together. Not many words, but enough to know what each person was still living for. She spoke about Mrs. Hill, literature, and Emily Dickinson, and how those verses once saved her from the feeling of invisibility in a world that didn't listen. Caleb spoke about Emma, the music teacher who once brought color into his life with simple symphonies in the small wooden house they'd fixed with their hands. Then came the 8th month of pregnancy. One drizzling April afternoon, as Eloise stood on the kitchen rug, her hand suddenly slipped from the chair. A sharp contraction tore through her, forcing her to grab the table. Amniotic fluid spread beneath her feet. Milo barked loudly. Caleb rushed in, spotting the deep red blood staining her skirt. Not much, but enough to chill his heart. Hospital. Now, he said, lifting her as he called for an ambulance. At the emergency room of Emory University Hospital, everything unfolded like a fast-forwarded movie. The sound of wheels racing, doctors shouting numbers, and machines beeping non-stop. Caleb gripped her hand, the other holding the oxygen mask to her face, as pain bent Eloise over. Cervix dilating prematurely, fetal heart rate unstable. A doctor said quickly, emergency C-section required. Caleb, she clutched his hand, tears in her eyes. If I don't make it, don't say that, Eloise, he growled, eyes blazing. You're going to live, both of you. You're a warrior. And that child is, too. Do you believe, she whispered, that we can love someone before we ever see their face? I do. He squeezed her hand tightly. I've known that feeling. With Emma. And now, with you both. The operating room doors closed. Caleb stood silently in the hallway. The red light above the door was still lit. He prayed not with words, but with the silence of someone who'd lost too much to dare hope again. 2 hours later, the first cry rang out. A sharp, strong cry like a bell slicing through the night. A cry that brought tears to the nurse's eyes, made the entire operating room exhale in relief. Eloise woke to blinding white light and a gentle voice. Congratulations, Miss Chapman. Your daughter is very healthy and incredibly stubborn. Caleb stood there, holding a tiny pink blanket, inside which a newborn skin still red, hair curly and black as ink, gripped his finger tightly, as if she already knew she belonged. Eloise burst into tears. Caleb laid the baby on her chest, skin touching skin, hearts aligned. Hello, baby girl, she whispered. You are my light in the darkness, the best thing I've ever done. What's her name? The doctor asked. Eloise looked up at Caleb. He nodded slightly. Liana Monroe Chapman, she said. Liana, like the vine that survives even when the soil is dry and the wind is harsh. And Monroe, thank you to the one who didn't turn away. The baby opened her eyes, deep brown, like Mrs. Hill's from long ago. 3 days later, they came home. Everything had changed. The kitchen now had a baby rocker. The living room echoed with lullabies. Caleb learned to make formula, change diapers, and soothe 2 a.m. cries. Eloise, once immersed in silk and banquets, now felt most fulfilled, sitting by the window with her daughter, reading Dickinson as sunlight streamed through sheer curtains onto Liana's soft curls. She rewrote the pages of her journal, no longer full of regret, but of promises to the future. She no longer lived in a glass case. She lived in a real home. And that child, a tiny warrior, had been born not from rejection, but from resilience and unconditional love. Eloise Chapman, once labeled the wife who failed her purpose, had become a mother rewriting legacy with her own hands. Atlanta felt like shedding a cold coat in the summer after a long winter. Magnolias bloomed white across green hills, songbirds chirped on the trees outside the Monroe porch, and laughter, a long absence, began to weave itself back into every corner. In that house, Liana Monroe Chapman, now 8 months old, was learning to crawl on the ivory-colored carpet, her chubby legs stomping the floor with unwavering determination. She babbled incomprehensible sounds, eyes sparkling mischievously, as if she knew she was the center of that little universe. Eloise was making a bottle of milk. She wore a loose cotton shirt, her hair tied up in a neat bun, and her eyes, though still shadowed with fatigue from sleepless nights, now shone with an inner light she had never found during her years in luxurious mansions. Caleb picked Liana up, kissed her forehead, and joked, "This is the future CEO of Monroe Family Incorporated Specialty, flipping toys, confiscating spoons, and melting my heart." Eloise laughed, not out of politeness or force, but from deep within her chest. Caleb was no longer the stranger who had rescued her on that rainy night. He had become an irreplaceable part of the daily rhythm, the one who lulled Liana to sleep with an old wooden guitar, who helped Eloise wash every bib, who always placed an extra cup of chamomile tea on the table without asking if she was tired. But perhaps because of that, a quiet unease crept into Eloise's heart, like the first strange winds of a new season. Did she have the right to let her child call this man Dad? One evening, after Liana had fallen asleep, Caleb sat on the porch with his unfinished sheet music and guitar. Eloise stepped out, wrapped in a thin shawl, hands holding a cup of warm cocoa. The breeze brushed her hair lightly over her shoulders, and the moonlight bathed everything in a soft, shimmering glow. "Caleb," she began, her voice slightly choked, "do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" He set the guitar down and looked up. "What do you mean? That I, a woman who was abandoned, am in your house, carrying a child who's not yours, yet you give her everything? Is that fair to you?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He sat in silence for a long while, then spoke slowly. "When Emma passed, I thought my heart would never work the same again. I lived each day as an empty shell. But then you showed up soaked, frantic, carrying a life that didn't even have a name yet." He turned toward her, his gaze steady. "Eloise, I didn't choose you to replace Emma, and I didn't pick Liana as some redemption project. I chose you both, because my heart finally remembered how to beat for something real again." Eloise looked at him, fear laced with gentleness in her eyes. "Are you sure? Because if one day Beau, her biological father, comes back to claim her, I don't know how to face that." Caleb gently squeezed her hand. "Then I'll remind her who held her during fevers, who learned to tie her bibs, who stayed up through the night for her first tooth." He smiled, with no bitterness. "A biological father creates the child, but a true father never lets her feel alone in this world." That night, Eloise wrote in her journal, "Caleb doesn't share Liana's last name, but he carries her worries, joys, needs, and a responsibility beyond any bloodline. He's not a substitute. He's something new. He's the second chance God gave not for me, but for my daughter." 3 months later, when Liana turned 1, they threw a small party on the porch. No designer balloons, no towering cake displays, just classic jazz, apple pie baked by Eloise, and neighbors offering warm, simple wishes. Eloise wore a white dress, holding Liana in her arms. Caleb stepped up with a small microphone, voice trembling. "Liana Monroe Chapman, you don't carry my name, but you are the blood of my heart. If you'll allow it, to call me Dad, I promise you'll never have to question that love." Eloise turned to her daughter and whispered, "Say it, love." Liana looked up at the man who had never let her be cold, who had never let her mother cry, and babbled her first 2 words ever, "Duh, duh." The whole yard erupted in laughter and tears, and from that moment, Liana was no longer the child who had been rejected. She was the daughter of 2 people, one mother who refused to break, and one father chosen by the heart. Autumn in Atlanta brought a soft, amber-like glow, spilling over the brick-paved roads and the fiery red trees of Green Hills. A crisp breeze whispered through the study curtains, where Eloise sat at Caleb's old wooden desk, staring at the computer and her first manuscript in nearly 2 years. Title: The Anatomy of Silence. A dissection of the unspoken. A fictional memoir about a discarded woman, an invisible mother, and the journey to reclaim the right to tell her own story. Liana was napping in the room next door. Caleb had taken Milo for a walk. That peacefulness made Eloise pause, glancing toward a small photo on the bookshelf, a black and white ultrasound taken on that fateful day. The day Beau Whitmore turned his back the moment he read the words, "It's a girl." And then, like a touch from an unhealed scar, she stood up and reached into the bottom drawer. A cardboard folder, an ivory envelope, handwritten, slanted letters, to Beau, unsent. A letter she had never sent. She sat down and opened it. "Beau, perhaps by the time you read this, if you ever do, I will no longer be the woman you once knew. The crystal vase you placed in your mansion is no longer a status symbol, no longer the wife who should have given birth to a son to complete the legacy. I don't write this letter seeking justice, nor to accuse. I write because if you ever meet my daughter one day, I want you to know what you missed. She has my mother's deep brown eyes, storm-curled hair, and a heart as fierce as Mrs. Hill's, the black woman who raised me amid racist whispers and crushed dreams. You once said, 'Girls can't carry a legacy.' You were wrong. Legacy isn't your last name, wealth, or the music empire bearing the Whitmore brand. Legacy is what survives rejection. It is my daughter. It is me. One day, when the stage lights go dark and the applause fades, I hope you remember. There was once a little girl who called you father in silence, and there was another man not of blood who stood there, teaching her how to walk, how to love, and how never to be afraid. If you ever see me again in the news, in a book, or in a crowd, don't turn away too quickly, because I no longer bow my head. I'm telling my story now, and this time, I don't need anyone's permission. Eloise. She folded the letter. No tears. Just the calm of someone who had lived long enough in darkness to no longer need forgiveness. That evening, when Caleb came home, he found her sitting in the garden, holding the letter, half burnt. Ash fell gently, like pieces of what no longer needed to be kept. You okay? He asked. Eloise nodded. I wrote Beau a letter. A long time ago. Never sent it. And now? I don't need to, she said with a sigh, because what I need is already here, on the high chair, in the bedroom, in our daughter's laughter. I don't live to be seen. I live to see my own worth clearly. Caleb took her hand. In the dark, their eyes met, no words needed. Eloise knew Beau might own the music industry, but he would never own what Caleb now had: trust without blood and love without conditions. A week later, she submitted her first manuscript to a small publishing house in Atlanta. The subtitle on the cover bore a quote from Mrs. Hill, "We do not need permission to be remembered." And so, Eloise Chapman was not just a mother. She was becoming the author of her own rewritten history. 6 weeks after submitting the manuscript, The Anatomy of Silence, Eloise received a call from Midland Press, one of the most influential independent publishers in the southeastern United States. "We don't just want to publish the book," the editor said over the phone, her voice buzzing with excitement. "We want you to speak at the Women Reclaiming Voice Conference in Savannah. Your keynote will be the highlight." Eloise froze. Not from fear, but because her voice would be heard in public for the first time in nearly 3 years. No longer edited by Whitmore PR rules. No longer choked by the kind of caution that comes with wealth. She looked at Liana playing with wooden blocks on the carpet, her tiny face glowing with pride after building a small wooden house. "Yes," she replied, like someone planting her flag on her summit. "I will speak." 3 weeks later, the ballroom of the Savannah Colonial Center was packed. Stage lights, cameras, journalists, publisher reps, feminist activists, scholars, students, all had gathered to hear a woman who had once been invisible step out of the shadows and reclaim her own narrative. Right before her appearance, Eloise stood backstage in a square-neck, deep navy dress, simple yet dignified. Caleb embraced her gently, whispering, "Liana and I will be in the front row. You're not alone." But what she didn't expect was Beau Whitmore's presence. He arrived late, white shirt, charcoal suit, sunglasses on, flanked by 2 assistants. No announcement, no greeting. He just sat in the last row like a spectator, unclear whether out of curiosity or control. Eloise saw him the moment she stepped into the light. Her heart clenched briefly. A scar twinged, but not enough to make her tremble. She stood tall, adjusted the mic. The spotlight dimmed everything else. 3 years ago, I was pregnant with a baby girl, she began, her voice remarkably calm. And the man I called my husband turned his back on me, just because she was a girl. Below, the audience held its breath. Those who knew the story, those who had heard the rumors, and those who had once remained silent. "I'm not here to defame," she continued. "I'm here because silence once killed me inch by inch, every single day. And I know I am not the only one who has lived with that silence in this room." Her voice rang steady. Silence when told we're too emotional. Silence when judged for not giving birth to a son. Silence when our voices were stolen in the name of the greater good. But today, I say it clearly, we women don't need to be granted power. We are reclaiming what was always ours. The applause thundered not because she was famous, but because truth had been spoken raw, proud, and unflinching. Beau Whitmore sat frozen, his fists clenched. No one could recognize the man who once dominated the Southern music industry, now suffocating on the weight of his own past. After the panel, the VIP lounge was still. Eloise sat with Caleb and Liana. The baby played with a signed copy of her mother's book. The door swung open. Beau entered. No assistance, no warning. Dark circles shadowed his eyes beneath his sunglasses. "You spoke publicly," he began, voice low. "You know what that does to Whitmore Entertainment stock, don't you?" Eloise stood, her face serene. "Do you still measure everything in stock prices?" she asked. Not bitter, just like someone asking about the weather. He stepped forward, gazing down at the child in Caleb's arms, a girl with storm-curled hair and a smile just like young Eloise. He hesitated. "Looks like you." "Good thing she doesn't look like you," Caleb cut in, stepping protectively in front. Beau stared at this man, unknown, unwealthy yet possessing something he never could buy. Trust. "Why are you here, Beau?" Eloise asked, her voice soft but sharp as a scalpel. "To reclaim what you threw away." Beau said nothing. Eloise picked up Liana and faced him. "This is my daughter, and if one day she asks, 'Who is my biological father?' I won't lie, but I will also ensure she knows Caleb was there daily. The one who taught her how to love with action, not with songs on TV. You can walk away just like you did before, or you can stand here and learn something money can't buy. Responsibility. But the choice is yours. This time, I'm not asking permission." Beau walked out. No one saw him off. And for the first time, Eloise didn't need validation from anyone. She had stood, stepped into the light, faced the power that once crushed her, not with hatred, but with truth and a resurrected pride. 3 weeks after the Savannah talk, Eloise received an anonymous envelope. No sender, only an address handwritten in a slanted, hesitant script. Suite 2901, the Whitmore Building, downtown Atlanta. She almost ignored it. But something in that handwriting, a clumsy desperation to stay unseen, yet still be seen, led her to the 29th floor of the building once owned by the man who had destroyed her. The door opened. The room smelled of expensive cologne and polished oak, luxurious, but empty. Beau Whitmore sat there. No tie, no TV-ready charm, just a salt and pepper-haired man with sunken, sleepless eyes. He didn't stand to greet her. He said, "Thank you for coming." Eloise didn't sit. She crossed her arms. "I didn't come here to reconcile, and I don't expect that," Beau replied. "I just want to say something. Not to the public, to you." He handed her a thick file. Not legal papers, bank transfer records, ultrasound photos, and private investigator reports. "You had me followed," she said coldly. "Not to control you," Beau sighed. "Because I didn't dare to face you. I knew you were pregnant. I knew where you went. But every time I thought about seeing you, I choked. By the artist ego and the shadow of my father." Eloise looked at him, not with anger, just fatigue. "You once said having a daughter makes a man weak. Remember?" Beau nodded, eyes brimming. "Now I know. It doesn't make you weak. It just forces you to be honest. And that's what terrified me the most." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote to her, but never sent it. Please read it. You don't have to respond." Eloise took it. The note was short, shaky, unpoetic, but the first thing he'd written, not meant for a stage. "Liana, he don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that one day, if you ever read this, you'll know I was a coward, and that you were nothing like me. You're like your mother, and that makes you strong. The man who once had the chance to be your father, but lost it." Eloise clenched the letter. What she felt wasn't forgiveness, but a deep kind of release. She didn't need Beau to change to move on. She only needed him to look straight into his own cowardice. And today, for the first time in 25 years, he had. "Do you want to meet Liana?" she asked, her voice even and steady. Beau looked up, as if he hadn't heard right. "Not as her father," she added, "but as someone learning to face the truth. She won't call you Dad, but if one day she's curious, I won't stop her." Beau nodded. "I know I don't deserve that, but thank you for not raising her to hate me." Eloise smiled, a quiet, almost imperceptible crack in the ice. "I'm not generous. I don't want my daughter to grow up carrying someone else's anger." She left the office, walked out of the Whitmore building with feet no longer heavy. Unlike the last time she left that place, pregnant and exiled from the world of fame, today she walked with choice. Not everyone gets a perfect ending, but every woman deserves the final word on her own life. And Eloise Chapman had reclaimed that not through lawsuits or bitterness, but through chosen silence and a voice born of peace. The day Liana Monroe Chapman started preschool, a light rain fell over Atlanta. Eloise dressed her daughter in a lemon-yellow raincoat and packed a purple dinosaur backpack, a gift Caleb had brought back from his first business trip since becoming her legal father. Outside the school gate, parents hurried under umbrellas, clutching their children's hands. Eloise knelt, brushing away a strand of hair from Liana's cheek. "Are you scared?" she asked. Liana shook her head, her eyes shining. "No, Mommy. I'm just curious." Eloise smiled and kissed her on the forehead. Caleb stepped forward, extending his big hand. "Let's go, Princess. The world's waiting for you to rewrite history." And together, they walked into the schoolyard, an imperfect family, whole only through the love they had chosen. That month, Eloise's book was officially released. No laudads, no flashy pre-campaign, but it spread the way truth always does from one reader to another. From the story of a single mother to thousands of women who had once stayed silent out of fear. A week later, she received a letter from the principal of Parker High School, the same school that had expelled her mother for getting pregnant out of wedlock in the 1,980 seconds. "We're hosting a Living History Month to revive women's voices forgotten by our education and social systems. We would be honored to have Miss Chapman speak to our seniors, because you are not just an author, you are the history we once ignored." Eloise went no heavy makeup, no assistant. She stood in front of a packed auditorium full of students. Many are in hoodies, wearing headphones, and their faces are blank like most 7-year-olds. "Has anyone here ever been told they weren't good enough?" she opened. A few hands went up, hesitant at first, then more, and then almost all. "Then we're the same," she said. "I was told I had no worth because I gave birth to a daughter. I was abandoned, once homeless, erased from history." She paused, then smiled gently. "But I learned something. History isn't written by the most powerful. It's written by those who refuse to be erased." The applause wasn't thunderous, but steady and deep. A black girl in the front row, torn t-shirt, red-rimmed eyes, whispered to herself, "I can do it too, right?" Eloise nodded, not out loud, but her gaze said everything. That night, back home, Eloise found Caleb telling Liana a bedtime story, but not about princesses. About a mother who survived the storm, a father not bound by blood, and a little girl who could build castles with her mind and heart. Liana dozed off in her father's arms, still clutching the book with her mother's name on it. Eloise stood at the doorway, silently crying, not from sadness, but from the certainty that her daughter would grow up in a world where women's voices would no longer be locked behind doors of outdated power, a world where the abandoned child can become the one who transforms her community. The father chosen by heart is recognized as the birth father. The mother who has once been shamed can become the one who redefines dignity, and where every painful story told opens a door for the next generation to walk through heads held high. In her journal that night, Eloise wrote, "I didn't tell this story because I'm strong. I told it so someone, somewhere, might know. No matter who you are, no matter what you've lost, you can begin again. And sometimes, the greatest miracle is daring to believe that you deserve to be remembered." When Liana turned 8, she was invited to participate in the Georgia statewide elementary school essay contest, with the topic, "Who is the most inspiring person in your life?" While many students wrote about basketball players, pop idols, or superhero cartoon characters, Liana wrote a simple essay, her handwriting round and neat, like the light in her eyes. "The most inspiring person to me is my dad, Caleb Chapman. Dad doesn't have superpowers, but he always wakes up early to comb my hair neatly. Dad doesn't play piano like Mr. Beau, who Mom once told me about, but he knows I like my toast a little burnt on the edges. Dad never says I have to live up to a legacy. He says, 'You're already the best gift I could ever be given.' I think real love doesn't need to be the same blood. It just needs to choose to stay every single day." When the judging panel read the essay aloud at the award ceremony at the Capitol Museum in Atlanta, the hall fell silent. Then came a long round of applause, not just for the 8-year-old, but for the bravery within such small, honest truths. Beau Whitmore was present too. Hidden among the guest rows, no one recognized him. His face bore the marks of time, but his eyes for the first time no longer held pride, only acknowledgement, not for himself, but for the man who had taken his place as a father. After the ceremony, Liana rushed to Caleb and Eloise. "I won, Mommy. I really won." Eloise lifted her, smiling through tears. Caleb wrapped them both in his arms and whispered, "I don't need a medal, because the most incredible thing is that today they called me Dad in front of hundreds of people." That same month, Eloise published her second book, titled The Legacy We Choose. It was no longer a memoir, but a collection of true stories from non-traditional families. A single mother whose sister became the godmother of her child, a foster father who overcame prejudice to walk his trans daughter to school, a grandmother who adopted a child abandoned at a gas station, and, of course, a chapter dedicated to Caleb, the dad who didn't give birth to me, but chose to stay every day. On launch day, Eloise didn't hold a press conference. She posted on social media, "Love doesn't need a genealogical certificate. Family doesn't need blood to be proven. Justice doesn't always come from the courts. Sometimes it comes from still standing after what should have broken you. And legacy isn't what we leave behind when we die. It's what we live and give daily, while we're still breathing." The post was shared hundreds of thousands of times, not because Eloise was a famous author, but because she had become the voice of those once rendered invisible. At the end of that year, they traveled together to Asheville, North Carolina, to the cozy wooden cabin in the woods, where it all began on that cold winter night long ago. Eloise hung a hand-carved wooden sign on the door. "This house is not built by blood. It's built by choice, by love, and by courage." When night fell, the three of them sat by the fireplace. Liana fell asleep in her mother's lap. Caleb tucked a blanket around them, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Eloise reached for his hand, as softly as a breath. "Thank you for not leaving." Caleb smiled and whispered, "I didn't choose to come. I just chose to stay, and always will." Outside, the world is still sorted right, wrong, real, fake, and blood, bond. But inside that cabin, a new definition of family had been born, not through heredity, but through the legacy of chosen love.